and welcome to this special edition of India Development Debate that we are broadcasting live from Bengaluru. It is India's answer to the Silicon Valley in some sense, and it's produced some of India's most iconic companies and India's most respected entrepreneurs. It also is one of India's highest tax contributing cities in some sense, and yet the quality of governance and infrastructure remains ordinary in the city of Bengaluru. Repeated state governments, repeated governments haven't really been able to help the city keep pace with its rapid development.
Indeed. So do the Congress and the BJP have a vision for Bengaluru, and can they put Bengaluru on the high growth path yet again? We're being joined by very, very eminent civil society voices and members of Indian industry right here on this very special edition of the India Development Debate. I'm Supriya, Shrinate, and with me Sandeep, Gurumurthi. We're broadcasting live from Bengaluru. Thank you each one of you for being with us. And let me just quickly take you across through this eminent panel and introduce everyone. We've of course got Kiran Majumdar-Shaw, a very, very eminent voice, a very vocal voice from the city. We've got Harish Pijur right here with us. I've got Ramesh Srivats on my right. Vani Kola represents Kalari Capital, and of course Mr. Krishna Kumar Natarajan. So thanks to each one of you for being with us. We hope the next 45 minutes to an hour is going to be a fruitful discussion. Not just the idea is not just to find faults, the idea is to put perhaps solutions on the table. So Kiran, I just think it's only fair that I begin with you. As one of the important voices who wants to develop Bangalore, do you believe Bangalore has got, and I'll keep switching between Bengaluru and Bangalore, so stay with me on that, but do you believe at one level Bangalore has got a raw deal?
Well, certainly because, you know, we don't have proportionate representation in the assembly, and therefore we've always been neglected. We are not part of the main vote bank, so to speak. And therefore, we've always got a raw deal, even though we contribute, you know, or account for 60% of Karnataka's GDP, and like you rightly said, I think we contribute significantly to the tax collection of the state and to the country. And of course, we have so much going for us as a city of the future for the country. But regardless of that, you're absolutely right, we are not important or we don't matter when it comes to the political electoral process. And therefore, we've got a raw deal. And of course, this city has grown exponentially, and successive governments have just not invested enough in Karnataka. So, I mean in Bangalore. So what we are seeing today is a cumulative neglect of our city, and the only thing that augurs well for our city is that we've got terrific citizens' engagement, because this is about fending for ourselves. That's right. And therefore you have a large number of citizens groups and you know, various sort of citizens.
That's very unique to Karnataka, Bangalore actually.
Yes, absolutely. Who've been constantly engaging with the government, demanding our fair share of, you know, allocation. So I think that's what it is. And I think we've seen successive governments sort of somehow yielding in some way to give us some amount of investment dollars, but that's not enough. And so the last election, you know, budget of this government, finally we were able to demand a lot of what we wanted. They have of course announced a wonderful package for Bengaluru, but I think it remains to be seen how much of that is electioneering rhetoric and how much of that is going to be delivered. So the new government, whoever it is, must deliver on that budget. For Bengaluru.
KK, do you agree with Kiran there? I mean, you know, she spoke about representation. Bengaluru accounts for what, 27, 28 of the total total MLAs, and there are 4 or 5 high-profile ministers who represent the city of Bengaluru. Is that an excuse? What explains apathy? And like Kiran saying, it's not about one government; it's about successive governments, because this is a state that has never voted a government back to power in decades now.
No, while I think representation is certainly an issue. To that extent, you don't get the voice or the backing of the political establishment, in spite of the ministers being in power. Many times I do believe the lack of vision in terms of what to do, because like Kiran rightly pointed out, this is a problem which has got compounded over 15, 20 years, largely because of the rapid growth which the city has had. Any planning model typically takes a 3-4% growth, whereas probably Bangalore has doubled in size in the last 6 years. The fundamental issue which I feel with a lot of establishment is that the ability to even solve the current problems, the know-how and the right technology and the capability within the government to solve the problem is not within the government itself. Can they solve it? I think definitely they can solve it. But the fact is, the will to do that, many times I think you point out, and Kiran also rightly said, there has been total lack of governance in the last 15 years, because ultimately when you think in terms of leadership, and genuinely today the city can think in terms of not just country level leadership, but even at a global level, it needs a certain political will, vision, and the ability to execute on that. And with an engaged citizens group like this, an engaged commercial enterprise like this, I think we can really achieve a lot. What is really lacking is the capability of the political leadership, the will and the vision.
Fair point. Vani, I'll just ask you this question. You know, we're talking about why has Bangalore not got its fair share. There are two issues on the table, like, you know, he's put out. He says there is lack of will and perhaps also vision. But is this also apathy? Because, you know, eventually the vote share from Bangalore is not perhaps as high as the rest of Karnataka. Do you believe there's also political apathy at one level and across governments maybe?
Obviously, without apathy, we wouldn't be in this state. So that's, you know, obvious. But the question is, how do you create a voice so that that can change and that can matter, and it is a part of legislative process and inclusion to have the engine of economic growth which happens out of Bangalore. And in one way, we are very, very lucky that despite all these challenges, this continues to be the center for startup energy, right? And many other perhaps better infrastructured cities in India, what they have not been able to achieve in by, you can say, serendipitously, Bangalore has. Now the question is, how do we engage this very center of technology to solve some of our problems and for this voice to be heard? And I think how the voice can be included. I think apathy will change if this voice can be heard and included in a productive, effective manner.
You know, KK spoke about vision for Bengaluru. Ramesh, do you believe this? I'm sure now that the manifestos are out, I'm sure you've had a look at it. You know, do you see a vision for Bengaluru? Do you see this sort of intent? I mean, yes, people are talking of making it a garbage-free city. There is conversation of coming up with 6K hubs. But do you really see a strategic vision to transform the city?
I know. I went through the manifestos. Actually, they are like every other manifesto. There is farmers, there is the big section on farmers, big on youth, big on women. And I believe that means they are the three who are in big trouble. Because anybody who's getting a lot of focus at manifesto is probably in trouble. They're going to be put on on a pedestal. They'll be expected to behave how others want them to behave. And there was some, I think the Congress and BJP had this in common, and BJP had a cow on top of that, you know, and that's all I could see on the manifestos. I don't think they have a vision, and there are two reasons for this. It's not unique to Bangalore. It's probably unique to every big city in India. It's unique to Mumbai versus Maharashtra. It's unique to Chennai versus Tamil Nadu. One is the representation that Kiran was talking about, right? That typically you do have while you give a large percentage of the income and tax, a very small percentage of the power, representation is there. Two is also the fact that the needs are very, very different. I mean, the needs of a big city are very, very different from the needs of not just rural, but even smaller cities. And therefore, the kind of expertise needed is different. I think in the long run, you will get a vision if India suddenly realizes, I don't know how it's possible, of big cities actually being far more self-governed. You know, where a BBMP plays a larger role, where the mayor is important, where citizens therefore have direct engagement with the government. And then perhaps there would be a vision. To answer your question, today I looked at the manifesto. I mean, that was it. It was about the usual stuff. It's all the waivers, it's the grants, it's the, you know, fancy sounding schemes, and that was it, you know.
Fair point. So from the farm loan waivers to laptops and smartphones, I'll ask you this question. You know, Bangalore, unlike any other city, and we've just spoken about this, Bengaluru, unlike any other metro which faces similar issues, has a very active citizen participation, and yet there is complete lack of infrastructure which hasn't really kept pace with development. There is this level of apathy. What will you attribute this to? I mean, we've got some of the most eminent voices in the city talking about development issues, willing to participate in it, and yet there seems to be a lack of governance.
Well, firstly, I'd like to say that, you know, this city, Bengaluru, has gone through different stages. I want to take you back to 91 to 2000. You know, that's phase 1, version 1.0 of Bengaluru development. And if you really look at that, we landed up with a 1 billion USD kind of a turnover out of the entire enterprises, and we had about 980 companies in IT, ITES, BT, etc., etc. And the second phase was between 2000 and 2010. And there we grew to about 2,300 companies. And in that phase, we had a 17.8 billion USD kind of a turnover. And today in 2018, as we are sitting out here, there are numerous startups. You throw a stone in Bengaluru, it'll hit a startup. If you really look at that, we are talking about a 40 billion USD kind of a number. Now, what does this mean? This means that this is a frenetically growing city. It has an ecosystem of human beings with minds which are very impatient and very growth oriented. So if you really look at Bengaluru, it is very unlike any other ecosystem you see in India. Now what happens out here is we have brilliant minds for sure, you know, and I'm literally flanked by all the brilliant minds out here. And if you really look at it, we have impatient minds. We have people who are concerned. Bengaluru in square foot area, I would literally say that, you know, the number per capita number of people who are involved in social causes, huge. Sure. Now that's all very good. But I think, you know, it boils down. Elections point out a stark fact. It simply tells you, hey guys, in Karnataka, there are 224 seats plus one, and out of them, we have 28 in Bengaluru. That itself tells you where you stand and where you are. But one good point to note is that if you see Bengaluru what it is today, with the kind of, you know, streets that you have, with the kind of street lights, with the kind of security and safety, which is very good, the secular environment, the mixed culture, you can do whatever you want in Bengaluru, quite unlike possibly other locations. It's fundamentally because of the fact that, you know, it's a very open culture. And this open culture is supported by a lot of people who are clamoring for development. So if people weren't involved, if civic agencies, you know, civil society wasn't involved, we would be a very different Bengaluru. Believe it or not, a lot of people talk a lot of things about Bengaluru, saying negative things about Bengaluru. I don't think Bengaluru is all that bad. If Bengaluru was all that bad, none of us would be here. Absolutely. And none of us, this is a magnet city today. We attract the largest numbers of people, the most intelligent minds, and guess what, guys? Economy-wise, we attract the biggest monies. And what does that mean? We must be okay. We aren't so bad.
It's quite remarkable, and but for the citizen participation, we could have been a lot worse. I take that point, but you know, Kiran, just to sort of turn this around a little bit, and a slightly tricky question in the sense that, you know, we keep talking about how active the citizenry in Bangalore is. Yet, if you look at voter turnout from Bengaluru, it has been pretty disappointing. You know, Karnataka in the 2013 elections had a voter turnout of 76.2%, but Bengaluru just about 52% of the people turned out to vote. Why is that?
No, I think we have a huge migrant population. Remember, you know, when you talk about this 10+ million population in Bengaluru, a large part of that is a migrant population. So there itself, you have to sort of basically look at. Yes, I agree that you base the voter turnout on the sort of the registration, but we are finding that there's a lot of flaws in the registration process itself. Now remember, Bengaluru is also a working city. So everyone's not going to be in Bengaluru at the same time. So, you know, we need to get into postal ballots, for instance. In our system, you're not allowed to cast postal ballots. And how many people travel? You know, if you look at the young people, first and foremost, you have to get more youth into the voting system.
True.
And so what you're seeing is that you just have the old Bengalurians voting. You want to get new voters, and those new voters are mixed. So I think you will see an improvement because there is a huge amount of citizens' engagement. In fact, I want to dwell on this point. You see, if you think about it, the citizens' engagement with the government, I think, is the highest. And it's a good engagement because this city also has some very unique models. You know, they've created vision groups headed by people like us. You know, so these new tech entrepreneurs have been asked to head these vision groups. And these vision groups are actually helping the government come out with new policies. So if you ask Vani, you know, Bengaluru was the first one to come out with a startup policy. First state to come up with an IT policy, a biotech policy, an electric vehicle policy, and so on and so forth. So I think there's a lot going for this city which is very positive, but we need to really get the whole paradigm changed. And you know, you're right. I mean, first and foremost, this city cannot be governed by one BBMP. The BBMP is too centralized and too small to govern such a big growing city. We've often ask the government to basically break up the BBMP into 3 or 5 subunits which can actually govern the city better, but of course it's fallen on deaf ears. I personally believe that yes, we could have a elected mayoral system which could also augur well for this city, not happening because it's too politically entrenched. Okay, so these are some of the things which, you know, it was rightly said that unless we see some shift in the way the city is governed, it's going to be very tough to really address all the challenges we are facing right now. But having said that, because we are such an engaged citizenry in Bengaluru, I think we still have some hope. We do have something going right for ourselves because as Harish rightly said, the kind of investments that still flow into Bengaluru is unprecedented.
True.
Everyone still wants to come here because somehow we've created this wonderful ecosystem of entrepreneurial energy, of academic excellence, and of government engagement.
Just to add to one point, that 52-70, whatever you said, the gap, is pretty much a pan-India phenomenon. It is that everywhere across India, urban voting turnout will be less simply because they have less stake in the government. Now, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know. The fact remains in rural areas, they are far more dependent on the government, whereas in urban areas, most of us have learned to live without it. So beyond a point, people throughout India, the urban vote. So it's not some Bangalore-specific thing. In fact, anecdotally, I find Bangalore citizens far more engaged with their government than
I agree with that. I think the citizenry engagement is far higher. But that's the problem with our system, that people who care don't go out there and vote, and they should in many more numbers. But Kay, coming to you, you know, Kiran spoke about challenges, and she spoke about a budget that has promised a lot, from frothing lakes to garbage dumps, traffic snarls, and all of that. The budget this time may have promised something for Bengaluru. We'll see how that package is going to be delivered. But do you see a sudden commitment now from policymakers, perhaps given this active citizenry, to move beyond the rhetoric, to perhaps walk the talk?
No, I really think there's a lot which can be done in terms of execution. Take a simple thing like lake renovation. While wherever private enterprise has got in, great example is Mr. Muthuraman, who retired as the CEO of Thing. He took up a cause, and that looks pretty good in terms of thing. Similarly, wherever private enterprise has taken over, it's doing well. But other than that, let's take a case like Bengaluru. I think it's very evident who are the people who are polluting it. Effectively, no action is being taken against them because the fact is, it's unstated that people who are doing it have their own political connections. So I think it's very important for people to realize that at some stage, I think that to look at the larger interests of the city and effectively wherever there needs to be a tough call which needs to be taken, I think that the government needs to do. Today, I think clearly they're soft pedaling on that.
Vani, comment on that. I mean, if you were to identify 3 areas that you believe whichever government were to come to power needs to focus on from Bengaluru's point of view, you know, other than the sort of grand talk on saying we'll make it garbage-free city, you know, but which are easy to implement, what would they be?
See, I look at it from the lens of what we have good going on, which is this innovation culture, which is very, very specific to Bengaluru. How do you make sure you can grow it, retain it, sustain it, right? So if I look at it from that perspective, clearly the top for everybody would be infrastructure, right? When it takes 2 hours to get 17 kilometers or whatever like it did for me today, then we know that that has to be fixed for the very fuel of economic growth, right? Second is, I think, you know, though the policy for startup culture and so on and so forth is there, really if you look at cities like Singapore, what they have done for promoting startup culture, there's a lot that government can do to take what is good that's happening here grassroots level and to foster it much more. And it doesn't take a lot from a budget perspective to do that. But I think that has to be something that would be on my sort of wish list, if you will, right? That would be the second thing. Now, I think we have a great education system in Bangalore throughout, from obviously academic as well as to schooling. But I think there can be a much more innovation culture, that science culture that the government can promote, because before industry can come in, for India to reach the global prowess, I think we need to create more science and innovation culture from the very beginning. These are some things that the government can really create a great impact.
But having said that, Vani, I think the government actually, in all fairness, has invested in science and innovation. Because this is the one government I find, at least I can give them some credit, is that they've actually invested as a state government in centers of excellence. They've actually given large corpuses to, small centers of excellence, incubators. They've created a large number of incubators. You won't believe it, in our sector itself, in life tech, they have invested 200 crores, okay, which I think is quite unprecedented. So I think from that point of view, they have done a little bit more than what was expected of them. But you're right. I mean, I personally believe that the future of the country is about investing more in science and innovation. And this actually needs to be done at a much higher level, even from the center.
I couldn't agree more with you. When the future of the country is science, education, and of course innovation. But Harish, one of the things, yes, change has happened, but perhaps it's been too slow. And that is frustrating for a city which sees so much of innovation, which sees so much of entrepreneurial energy and all of that. What will you attribute this slow change to? Is there lack of coordination between agencies? I mean, we've spoken about the political apathy and political will and all of that, but I'm just talking about from a micro point of view. Is there lack of coordination between agencies?
Well, one of the first things that worries me is that governments, whether, for the last 25 years in the state of Karnataka, have had one key issue. I don't think governments know how to manage big cities, by themselves. Now, there's a terrific model which the globe follows, and that is outsourcing some of the things that you can't do yourself. And outsourcing outright is a very difficult thing within the political reality of a state like Karnataka. But then there is something called public-private partnership. There is something called a special purpose vehicle, a JV, etc. All exploited, all explored, and all done. Believe it or not, wherever these have been experimented with, things have moved well. Because at the end of the day, the government also has an issue. Because we, citizens of Bengaluru, are a very impatient set of people. And rightly so. Because we pay our taxes, and we are really involved, and we pay a humongous amount of taxes. So when you pay out, you expect to see the, what comes out of it back in your city. We don't see that. Yes, we will not see 100% of it, but at least we want 30% of it coming back into the city, because the urbanization index is about 33.2%. So we want that. So the model that will work in a city like Bengaluru or in any of the big cities is a PPP model, is a joint participation model, where citizens sit together with the government and do it. I'm even going to say something dramatic. I'm saying that, governance of cities is a bit too important to be left to governments. Very seriously. Because look at Bengaluru. Bengaluru has got as many as 36 bodies which are totally oriented to monitoring the city, okay, from a citizen's perspective. BPAC is one of them. There's Whitefield Rising. There are 23 others, 31 others around. Now, each of these bodies are out there as shadows to governance. And I think that's a beautiful model for any city to have. There must be a government. There must be a minister in charge of Bengaluru. There must be, smaller MLAs in charge of different constituencies. But for every MLA, there needs to be a shadow body. And that shadow body is the civic body that I'm talking about. And guess what? This civic body is peopled with the best minds. We have minds which do global work for different cities all over, but we don't work for ourselves within Bengaluru. Okay? So it's a question of harvesting it. It's a question of knowledge harvesting, and it's also a question of harvesting people power with government power.
Kiran, just to take that point forward, and since Harish spoke about citizens having a stake in governance, you've sort of got your hands dirty, if I may say so. And the issue that's talked a lot about is, of course, your experience with the tender shore roads. You've sort of been a champion of that, and we're seeing some of that, now in the city making a big difference. But tell us about your experience in terms of the timelines it took, the interdepartment coordination, the fact that how it missed the deadlines. What can we learn from that experience?
Actually, it taught us a lot. One is what Harish said, this is a great PPP model, because it actually involved a group of citizens, a citizens' body to work with the government and bring their attention to the need for good roads and roads that endure. And the fact that we need a proper tendering process which is transparent and which will deliver on the specs that we need. That was the whole objective of tender sure roads. And you know, what was interesting was we learnt a lot from this particular PPP model. One is that we have a great bureaucracy, a bureaucracy that actually knows a lot and should be leveraged in a much better way. So we actually have very enlightened, and we had very enlightened chief secretaries who could bring all these agencies together, bang their heads and make them do what was required. So all that was achieved, and of course it took, you know, successive chief ministers who actually said go ahead and do it. So that was a good thing, because they didn't know what we were trying to do, but they felt, okay, if this is something that the citizens want, it's not a huge amount, let them go ahead with it. So I think they allowed us, they empowered us and enabled us to work with the bureaucracy and say, okay, you go and do it. And it actually taught us how to get things done. Now, the biggest challenge for us is after we got everything, you know, out of the way, we then realized that it doesn't stop there. You've got to almost dirty your hands in monitoring execution. And that's also something we've learned, that don't just expect that you hand it over to the, you know, the BBMP and they will execute. No, I think it's also taught us that we have to constantly handhold BBMP if you want good execution. And this is the model actually we followed for everything, which is actually working. At least it's not fast enough, because, you know, we are all busy people. I mean, you can't be taking time off to monitor things which, but to get back to what Harish is saying, these are the kind of things you need to outsource, because we know that we are very poor in execution. Can't you have agencies that can help to execute projects in time, monitor quality? That's going to make a big difference.
Sure.
Why don't you come in on that? I mean, one part of this whole debate is getting the right policy, and the other part of the debate is getting your hands dirty, getting involved, and that has been, I think Kiran is being far too nice. It's been a frustrating experience, because look at the timelines, the prescribed ones, and when it happens eventually, and then the whole point of execution and monitoring it. The experience isn't the best in town.
Yeah, and that's true. And combine that with a young citizenry who's fundamentally impatient, right? And by the way, yes, but the solutions that you will do, the fact is true. I mean, there's no point doing policy till you execute. There's no point doing everything in 20 years. Some of the things are needed now. Yes, the first 5 years of rapid growth caught us unawares, but now it's been 25 years. By now we should know what's happening. But finally, the solutions will come back to this, pretty much what Harish was saying and Kiran was elaborating on, that things can be done by people who are capable of doing it. And now governments are not capable of doing execution. They're good at setting policies, they're good at setting priorities, but when it comes to execution, yes, I think it's a three-part agreement. The government sets the policy and encourages it. The citizens influence the government and perhaps monitor it, but the actual execution needs to be someone who can actually build the roads, someone who can actually clean the water, someone who can actually provide garbage collection. And that's the way you need it. And if that costs the money, that's money well spent, right? And spending it on 10 other things.
So drawing in experts and not just deciding to do it on your own from a government point of view.
Okay. Just a point.
Sure.
I think that's a very important point which Kiran brought out in terms of trying to engage the citizens. But what is most important is, well, engaging, like she said, empower the people to execute the job. Again, based on our experience of waste management, we've done a platform, we first brought it to Bangalore, did it in 28 wards. The average earnings of the so-called rack pickers, which you call them waste management professionals, has gone up by 3 times. 112 wards, again, within the confines of this, we are told rest you can't touch because of the political interference there. Which I think we need to break, because the fact is, if you acknowledge that this is something I can't execute, and there is citizens engagement, empower them to do the job. You can't say, okay, that you can't touch. To the extent now we've gone outside Bangalore, and Mr. Jensen has Hazaribagh is one of the experiments where it's working great in terms of things. So fundamentally, I think politicians need to say, you know what, in some areas which are touching the citizens, I'm not going to interfere in it. While citizens may be eager to get engaged, I think if you don't empower them, nothing will happen.
And I think this is also reflected by in this study that BPAC did, and I think I want Kiran and Harish to weigh in on this on sort of an objective study on the MLAs representing the city of Bengaluru, and you sort of pick parameters like how they utilized funds, their representation in parliament, whether there were any cases, criminal cases filed against them in the police, etc., etc. And I figured that just 9 out of 27 scored 75% and above. So that tells you, and this is it's not a BJP or a Congress problem, it's a political problem, and that tells you that that is the pedigree of elected representatives from the city of Bengaluru. Harish?
Or from anywhere for that matter, actually.
Yeah, we live in a political reality. A lot of people who are corporate people, all of us are, tend to kind of distance ourselves from the reality of the grassroots. That's the first thing we must stop doing. And I think that is the reality that we bit into. Because, at the end of the day, there are grassroots level realities. There are people-centric folk. You cannot use a parameter like education when you judge an MLA anymore, because, education means nothing at that particular point of time. The MLA is a terrific worker, etc. So what really happens is, at the grassroots level, these various issues come up. The idea is to be as objective as possible. The idea is not to be subjective, because the moment you think subjective, then you're getting into opinions and opinion polls, and all of us know no opinion poll is ever correct. So so the entire BPAC effort has been at being completely objective and look at parameters which are important, and there are several parameters. Basis that, one throws up a list. Now the list may not be a very ideal list completely the way we want it to be, ideally in utopia. But we live in Bengaluru, and I think that is the difference.
But isn't it also a function, Kiran, I want you to talk about this because you're vocal and you've been candid. Isn't it also a function that Indian industry and while citizen engagement is all very good, all empowerment, people don't want to get their hands dirty with real politics. I mean, how many of us would want to give up our well-paying cushion jobs and want to be a part of active politics? That's also a reflection on the kind of people we are electing. And Bangalore is no exception.
No, but I'll tell you something, Supriya, you don't need to be part of the political system. You can be an influencer. In fact, we find that we can make much bigger impact by holding our MLAs accountable. We are actually, at BPAC, we have something called a civic leadership program, where we actually train young, aspiring political leaders to basically groom them in terms of what is good governance. That is what we feel will shape this governance system altogether. And it's amazing how these young, aspirants are beginning to actually take ownership of certain local problems. We have a number of these people who are now wanting to stand for corporation elections and things like that. Of course, we've got some of the B-clip leaders who even won a few of the assembly elections in the past. But I think, it's important for us to remember that even if you don't want to, as you call it, dirty your hands and get into politics, you still need to understand the political system and the political process, and you can influence it in a big way.
One, I want you to sort of come in on your own personal experience, because I know you spent 2 decades in Silicon Valley, if I'm not wrong, and then you moved to India, to Bengaluru, about 10 years back, right? From then to now, right? I mean, from how do you think is I know we're sort of saying what is wrong and etc. But how have you seen the city transform, both from political intent to sort of execution? How have you seen the city evolve over the last decade after you came back?
Like Kiran said and you said, I think the city has been very embracing of the startup culture, right? This is still sort of the global spotlight. And in fact, I remember I moved to US in 1985, and Bengaluru, they didn't really know where that was in India at all, right? So, but today, wherever you go, you say Bangalore and they know where exactly it is, maybe not geographically on the India map, but they know what it stands for, and so on and so forth. So the cosmopolitan nature of this city, which has been cultivated, inculcated, embraced, I think over the last 10 decades, if anything, that open culture, I think, has really stood to test, because it has been tested with the level of growth that has happened, and that, I think, is credit to the Bangalore citizenry. And Bangalore, what was it? It was a garden city, retirement city at one point, right? And today it's the startup city. So not many cities go through that kind of evolution and do it gracefully and graciously, which I think Bangalore has definitely done. No doubt in the last decade, I'm a little sad about how much greening we have lost, how much green cover we have lost. And I think I continue to believe that for a city to be vibrant and viable long term, that it has to be measured on many livable index, whether that is, citizen services, whether that's culture, economic development, of course, but there are other things that make a city livable. And I think Bangalore has a lot going for it, but in the pace of growth, perhaps some of those other things that are also important from making any city a very vibrant city, that I think is important to not lose.
We keep talking about Bangalore and Silicon Valley, and I must ask you this question. Does Bangalore stand the risk of losing its Silicon Valley status to Hyderabad? The GES was held there this time. The T hubs are attracting new startups. The policy is extremely incentivizing for people to go there, set shop. Is that risk real finally?
See, I must in a very lighter way and say events do not indicate the real infrastructure within the city.
Sure.
I think like Kiran rightly pointed out, the intellectual capital which is here is very difficult to duplicate anywhere else, both in terms of academic institutions and the type of people who are there. Yes, the physical infrastructure, there are some troubles, which again is not something which can be resolved, and with the level of engaged citizenship, I think there are moves which are really making it more viable. The third is really the emotional infrastructure the company has. Talk in terms of any of the Fortune 500 companies which have set up operations here. Everybody will swear on the city saying because it's so livable, it is cosmopolitan, it really takes in people from other cultures and sort of assimilates them. Only if one or two of these issues can get resolved, we'll only invest more. And increasingly that whole notion of Bangalore being the back office is not relevant anymore because a lot of innovation, be it Cisco or be it GE or Honeywell, a lot of their global innovation is really happening here. So I think for any other city to really try and address these multi-dimensional elements to even stake a claim to leadership, I think is far away.
I'm not even going to ask Kiran if that's going to happen.
I want to add one thing, competition is always good.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
And I think there's no harm in that. But Ramesh,
Vani is showing her sort of
The
love
other hand.
for Hyderabad.
The other hand.
but
Competition, just as long as it's far away. Hyderabad is.
it should be the rear view
And
mirror.
the odds are stacked
They're at
against
a
you.
distant second.
A distance.
I like the way people
Very
are still rooting
competitive
for
spirit,
Bengaluru. Yeah.
absolutely.
But Ramesh, again, in terms of solutions, we've seen a lot of concentrated development, within pockets of Bengaluru. Does the administration need to look at sort of, hubs around the city? That's a model that's worked in other centers as well, and invest in the infrastructure there because it's pockets of the city where we've seen a lot of growth, a lot of industrialization, and so urban infrastructure isn't keeping pace. Is that the way to go forward?
Unless there's a better way, because it's not possible to uniformly spread out anything, right? The only way you can do it is create hubs and connect them well. Make sure people don't have to travel much, but when they travel easily. I don't see any other way of doing it. I mean, one thing, we are not like Bombay, we're not an island, we have a lot of land on every side. We can grow horizontally, and it's a piece of good fortune because then, like what Vani said, can be taken care of. Our lakes and our greenery, because space is not at such a premium out here. You can be expanding. But at the end of it, yes. I mean, when I came in, I've been in Bangalore from '93. Whitefield was a place. It's like going out of station or something, right? Yeah. Now half my meetings are there. So I think, but there's no. I don't think it was very planned. I just think that pockets developed on their own, and now
people are grappling with it.
A lot of what happens out here, I think we'll justify it after it happened, but I just think it just happened. I don't know.
That is why in the last budget, we actually put so much pressure on the government, and they actually agreed to allocate a budget for 250 kilometers of, number metro, extension lines. I mean, they should have done this a long time ago. I mean, Whitefield was a no-brainer. Electronic City was a no-brainer. But we had to push them to say, no, please expedite these phases. And of course, to the airport. Now, they've also agreed to, improving the road network and things like, and widening roads and outer ring road and what have you. But what we've also asked for is they should actually think of an elevated road network, a road-on-road network which does not allow or does not involve land acquisition, like what has happened in Bangkok and many of those cities. Now, that is where we need to see also, it's a quick solution. But again, there's a lot of, sort of pros and cons in terms of what citizens want and don't want. So I think we have to look at those kind of solutions.
Hey, Harish, I want to ask you, now that we've spoken about the challenges, I think it's also time that we look at the brighter side. The Mahadevapura MLA says there should be a Singapore-like tax on cars. The Congress rivals it by saying that the priority of usage should be from cyclists, pedestrians, public, and then private transport. Is this also a sign of changing times? I mean, encouragingly so.
Well, I'm not too sure because, Bengaluru is many, many different things. We have people who earn their living from tech, from biotech. We also have a very vibrant textile industry in Bengaluru out of it. A large number of workers who come there, as many as 51 lakh plus workers from there. So, Bengaluru must have a common policy and a common rule for all. We cannot say that Bengaluru belongs to only one type of people. If you really look at it. I say, in Kannada phraseology, we have something called Mannina Maga. Mannina Maga means son of the soil. Okay. I have a phraseology which I just texted out or tweeted out today, which says there's something called silicon in a maga. Mannu, silicon, quite close if you really look at it. But the point is, there are two Bengalurus. One is the Mannina Maga, the other is the silicon in a maga. Bengaluru belongs to both and equally. And if you really look at it, I think we must not make Bengaluru into a fine city like Singapore is, fine for everything. But there is a case for creating a new Bengaluru because, we are the 4th largest tech cluster in the world. I don't think we should aspire to become India's, the world's 3rd largest tech cluster even. We must remain the 4th largest tech cluster, just stay there, don't try to climb, but create the 5th largest tech cluster, possibly in Hubli. I don't know, possibly in Mangaluru. We have to create new clusters and then, really talk about creating a web of these clusters and then talk about Karnataka being the world's largest tech cluster overall. But the important thing is, again in our development model, we talk development. This is the India development debate. When I talk about Bengaluru development, I do believe we need to be careful. We need to be careful about protecting all the other things. Bengaluru must not become the brick and mortar and everything that we are talking about. We need to protect our lakes. We need to have our water bodies thriving. We need to have our trees intact and protected. We protest when one tree is going to be chopped somewhere. There is a protest happening in Bengaluru because we are very, very concerned that the green cover doesn't go out of control. Because one of the biggest diseases of big cities is that you tend to value land more than everything that grows on the land or anything that waters the land. That mustn't happen. We must not, when we look at land, we must say, can I plant a tree there? Can I do some gardening there? Instead of saying, oh, do I spot land? Shall we develop it? But, brick and mortar. I think that's an important one.
It's interesting that a politician goes abroad, the only thing he learns is a fine, is it?
But,
easiest thing to implement, not the
but, KK, I mean, the import of the question really is, and, Supriya lives in Delhi, I live in Mumbai. We don't see MLAs in Delhi, and probably it's because of a decade of citizen activism that we're seeing politicians talk the language of, urban governance, So it's not about a specific scheme, but the fact that they're thinking in that direction, and I don't see that happening in Mumbai, and I'm not sure Supriya sees it. So is that a positive change? The fact that people are thinking in terms of, doing something for pedestrians, for cyclists. I can't imagine, a politician in Bandra or in Mumbai think on those lines. That's the larger import of what she was.
And that's also a sign of the success of the citizen engagement and
citizen activism.
No, I think it's a sign of positive change because I'm sure you'd have heard that BBMP is one of the corporation which really publishes a quarterly report like any other listed company does. You cannot sort of get such a thing anywhere else outside. A larger element, like Kiran rightly said, in terms of educating the people on good governance, there's a long way to get on that. And what you're seeing is that top percentile of people who have gone through that, who understood the value in terms of good governance, are the people who have now changed. But there's still work to be done on the balance, 80%. But that can be done because there's really a very engaged citizens group. There are people who are willing to put effort, money, and energy into doing it. So I think it's clearly a very positive sign in terms of what is happening is clearly good, but it's still not enough.
So as we wrap things up, let's talk positive, let's take positive vibes away. But Vani, let's start with you, and this is the last round really. Are you more optimistic about the future of Bangalore than say you were a decade back?
I am very optimistic. That's my nature, but also that's my work. But that's also my reality that I see every day. I'm very, very optimistic.
Same, and I want to say one thing that I think we will be better. I'm always optimistic, especially because I think we've got a lot of the core right. I think you've got a young population, you've got vibrancy, you've been talking about the cosmopolitan culture. When Bangalore embraces everybody, it's a much more free city, there aren't that many rules, which is the kind of thing young people like, and young people will continue to come there. And that core we have to retain. On top of that, we're already, the metro is very nice whenever you use it, wherever is it, the Tendoshua roads are nice. So we actually have the core, and the next 5 years is just, repeat and do the things which we have already done a bit better. And I'm sure the citizens are going to be quite involved in that.
KK, do no wrong. Would that be your message to politicians? Because the fundamental energy of the city is such that it will only move ahead.
Yeah, I think they must sort of get away from things which is touching the citizen. As long as they don't interfere in that, I think there's enough of an interest group which will ensure that high quality service reaches the citizens. So just stay away from messing up in basic services to the
So
citizens.
do the real maximum governance and minimum government as far as Bengaluru is concerned.
Well, I think, as far as Bengaluru is concerned, we should really be saying nothing will go wrong, just as long as the young spirit of Bengaluru continues. And it's bound to continue. 63% of the population of this city is below the age of 35. And to that extent, it will continue. So till we think young, nothing will go wrong. And at the same time, we need to look at development with a different perspective, as I was saying.
Kiran, much as I'd like to ask you, who do you think is going to win the election? But I'm sure I'm not going to get an answer. So, what gives you the optimism that irrespective of who wins the election, we are on the right track?
Well, I've always been an optimist. I've always been a die-hard Bengalurian. My, request to whoever forms the government is please deliver on some of the most important projects that we have all signed off on. Actually, if we just go by what the budget has actually allocated for Bangalore, and if we can go ahead and deliver on that budget in time, I think we will be doing quite well.
So clearly, Bangalore doesn't need grand ideas. Bangalore needs execution and a focus on governance above everything else. And I think the city's power and energy will take care of the rest. Supriya?
I think the whole political campaign around this election, calling it Nemma Karnataka and Nemma Bengaluru, also kind of captures the spirit. In no other part of the country do you see an election that says my city and my country and let's fight it like that. I've got family here that's refused to move back out of Bangalore, so I think that's a big vote of confidence in the city. Thanks to each one of you for being such a wonderful panel here, and thank you viewers for tuning in.